Hello all, thanks for being here with us this morning. I'm Julien Waro. I'm in charge of the Energy Scan platform here at NG Global Energy Management and Sales. So welcome to this new quarterly webinar session entitled Managing Energy Scarcity While Avoiding Recession. So today the session will last 90 minutes. Because we have a very busy schedule as the energy crisis intensified over the past few weeks in Europe. As usual, we'll start the session with Olivier Gasnier with a macroeconomic outlook. It will be followed today by Laurent Politis, who is a weather analyst here at NG Global Energy Management and Sales. Then Adrien Meot will take the lead for gas issues, and we'll close the session with Etienne Cauvin on power and EUA markets. Let me remind you that this is an interactive session, so don't hesitate to ask your questions during the presentation. We'll do a Q&A session after each presentation. And I will pick some of the questions within the chat room. So it's time to start with Olivier on macro and oil topics.
Hello everyone, and thank you for attending this webinar. 3 months have passed since the last one, and the economic environment has only worsened, we must say, with inflation rising to new highs. However, I guess we can see the end of this rise. This is okay. I'm sorry, we have some technical issue. I don't know if you can hear me. That is a bit puzzling. Okay, I will continue. I think it's okay. Sorry. So I was saying that we can see the end of the rise in inflation. This is already the case in the US, where inflation has decelerated in the last 2 months. It will be the case soon in Europe, because actually new increases are expected in September. The figures for the Eurozone will be released this week, and they are expected to show further acceleration of the euro area inflation to close to 10%. Actually, the main difference between the US and Europe is, as you know, energy, and in particular the evolution of gas and electricity prices. But my colleagues will come back on this in a few minutes. Let me remind you, nevertheless, that a simple stabilization of energy prices, as you can see on the right on the chart, would have a massive downward effect on inflation due to a very favorable base effect. On all other things being equal, as we economists like to say, this stability in energy prices would lower the inflation rate from 3 to 3.5 percentage point by mid-2023, which is really significant. So let's talk about oil. The price of Brent crude oil is around $85 per barrel, which means it had returned to its pre-war levels right now. It has been falling steadily since June, with the increase in OPEC output on the downward revision of the demand outlook during summer. If you look at the backwardation of the curve, it has returned to normal levels. Almost normal. There is still a risk premium on the spread between the 1 month and 12 months maturity, which probably reflects the uncertainty about the consequences of the EU embargo on Russian oil, which will begin in December, as you know. So here are our forecast for supply and demand for the oil market. As you can see on the stocks line, the rise in inventories in Q3 does explain, the price decline, but the outlook does not appear to be as bad as one might think if you assume that the recession is coming. Perhaps you can say that OECD demand could be less resilient than expected, but it seems to us that the two main uncertainties concern, firstly, the recovery of Chinese demand, and secondly, the impact of the embargo on Russian output on Russia's ability to increase its sales in Asia, while they already seem to be declining since August. In the case of China, the risk is, of course, rather downward on prices. If there is less demand. And in the case of Russia, the risk could be on the upside, as higher than expected Russian output would probably lead to a reaction from OPEC, which has not been taken into account here. So, say differently, either Russia output posts significant decline, either OPEC output is cut. And all in all, the outlook may not be as bad as feared for oil prices. But what is highly unlikely is a rebound in prices. So, as I told you, this is good for inflation. So now let's go back to inflation, because even if energy prices were to fall sharply on pull inflation down, the problem is that the factors likely to keep inflation above the central bank's target for the long term are already at work. In the case of the US, the chart on the left shows that structural factors now account for around 60% of inflation at the expense of the temporary factors, that is to say, the exit from the COVID crisis and the rise in energy prices. On the right-hand chart, we can see that in addition to energy prices, food prices have soared really in Europe. And above all, that there is two core inflation, that is to say, excluding energy on these food prices, that is clearly on the rise. If you look at the evolution of industrial prices, excluding energy, service prices, etc., they are all sharply accelerating. In August, core inflation reached 6.3% year-on-year in the US, 4.3% in the Eurozone, and it is expected to accelerate to 4.7% in October. That is to say, more than twice the ECB's target. So by the end of 2023, given the strengthening of its core pressures, which stems largely from the savings accumulated during the pandemic, also to very tight labor markets and persistent disruptions in production chains, it is almost certain that inflation will still be above the central bank's 2% target. And in fact, we believe that it could be significantly higher than that, as you can see on this table that presents our forecast and also the consensus forecast for inflation. The consequence for the central banks is which have entered the race very late. They were sure of their diagnosis about the temporary nature of inflation, a bit like the air in La Fontaine's fable. Now, for them, it's really a question of making up for lost time. The outlook for rate peaks is constantly being revised upwards. 75 to 100 basis point increases in key rates are becoming the norm, and above all, the outlook for a downward turn in key rates in 2023 that had sustained market optimism, for example, in August, has simply disappeared in the recent week. In short, if you want to sum up, interest rates are expected to go higher for longer. And the bond market reflects these changes. Since the beginning of the year, the 2-year rates, which describe monetary policy expectations, have risen by more than 400 basis points in the US. They now exceed the 10-year rates, which nevertheless continue to rise, as if they confirm the structural shift to a world with inflation for the coming decade, breaking with what has happened over the past 30 years. The 3-month rate will soon be higher than the 10-year rates as well, as the Fed will continue to raise its key rate. And of course, that means the whole yield curve is going to be inverted. So this chart that you know very well now shows that the inversion of the yield curve is a very reliable leading indicator of recession, especially since the spread between the 10-year and the 2-year rates has not been that negative for 22 years. So really on this basis, a recession looks unavoidable next year. If you look at the European situation, recession is already here, as consumer and business survey increasingly show. In the chart on the right, you can see that the purchasing manager indices have plunged below 50, which separates expansion from contraction. That is the case already for Germany and Italy, and this is no accident, as these two countries are highly exposed to the energy crisis. The recession has already started there, but the neighboring countries, France in particular, will not escape it. The rise in energy bills is limited by government action, but consumption will also have to be cut. And in addition, many companies have already reduced or stopped their activities, which have because they have become unprofitable due to the rise in costs. You will have more details with my colleagues about all that in the coming minutes. The Eurozone has been able to make up for lost time in the first half of the year thanks to the post-COVID recovery. So that probably is a bit misleading to have seen such a resilience, but we can now expect at least 2 or 3 quarters of contraction in activity. And one way to very easily visualize the economic shock of the price surge is to note that the Eurozone trade balance has deteriorated by the equivalent of 5 percentage points of GDP in the last 18 months. Which is really colossal, as you can see also on this chart. In view of what I have just said, it may appear a bit surprising that the 2023 growth forecast are not much lower. You can see the world GDP expected at plus 2.7 after 2.6 in 2023. That is really very, very close. That brings us back to the assumption about oil. China is going against the tide. China is expected to escape its crisis. It has no inflation, no monetary tightening, but still beyond the COVID risk, the potential for a rebound in activity is clearly held back by the real estate crisis and the very unpromising international environment. So beware the downward risk on China. In the United States, the economy is resisting, but I would say this can only encourage the Fed to tighten its policy too much, which will push the economy into recession during 2023. And also watch out for the United Kingdom, whose prospects are darkening with the crisis of confidence that is shaking the British market at the moment. We can really see right now a collapse of the pound on a very sharp rise in rates, and the consequence of all this have not been taken into account in this forecast. Okay, so I will stop here to answer some question. I hope we have solved our technical issue. Julien?
Olivier, do you hear me?
Yeah. Can hear you.
Sorry, we have a lot of technical issues this morning with the webinar service. So we know that some users did not manage to connect to the webinar. So don't worry, the session is recorded, so there will be a replay after the available on EnergyScan after the session. Olivier, a few questions for you. Especially regarding the UK situation. On one of your charts, we saw a very sharp rise in UK interest rates. Can you tell us a bit more about the UK situation?
Yeah, sure. As I just mentioned it, the UK has been in turmoil since the new government announced 45 billion pound of unfunded tax cuts. This is what is really important. I mean, there is no cut in expenditure or no rise in other taxes in front of those announcements. On that came on top of measures estimated at 150 billion pound to limit the impact of rising energy prices on households and businesses. And these measures were also mostly financed by an increase in indebtedness. So the market really thinks this is madness, and this is a very rare event. The IMF has just asked the government, the UK government, to abandon these tax cuts. We can really see that since last Friday, the pound has really collapsed. It has fallen below its lowest level against the historical lowest level against the US dollar that was touched in 1985. We are very close on the parity if you look at the cable, the pound against the US dollar. And there is really a surge in interest rates, which is really incredible, with 30-year rate above 5%, 10-year rates above 4, etc. That could push the Bank of England to rise rates to defend the pound in the coming days. So in short, all the expected benefit on growth of the government policy would disappear. That is a real catastrophe for the UK economy at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Olivier. Second question. So you pointed out that the Chinese economy is moving a little bit against the rest of the world at the moment. Could this prevent this global recession?
Yeah, yes, I talk a bit about that as well, but let me maybe repeat the main assumptions. It's true that the expected recovery in China does indeed somewhat distort the 2023 forecast. When you look at the forecast, it's not that bad. I mean, you have very low global growth, which is extremely low by historical standards, below 3%. But that is not really in line if you compare to 22 with the fact that the US or Europe would fall into a recession. The problem is that the recovery in China may be overestimated. There is a lot of uncertainties around that. As I told you already, China will not be able to rely on external demand as they have done in 2022, really to save the level of growth. And it is assumed that the impact of the pandemic will gradually disappear, but actually we don't really know what will happen. And up to now, the zero COVID policy has not changed. So we could have potential disruptions in the coming months that continue to weaken the Chinese economy. And above all, we have the real estate crisis. It is estimated to reduce the past growth potential, but by about 25%. That is to say, for example, if you take the assumption that the potential growth rate was between 5 to 6%, that reduces the potential of growth by between 1.5 and 2%. This is really or about 1.5%, say. This is really huge. So I would say I would recommend to be cautious regarding those forecasts on China. The risks are clearly on the downside when you consider the potential of recovery of the Chinese economy.
Okay, thank you, Olivier. Thank you for your answers. So it's time to move on to the second part of the presentation with Laurent on weather topics. So Laurent.
Hello.
Hello, Laurent. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. So Laurent Politis speaking for the weather outlook for this winter. So I will do a seasonal forecast. I will present you first what is seasonal forecast, then how to use seasonal forecast by presenting you the rule and the skill of the seasonal forecast. Afterward, I will do a seasonal forecast for temperature and precipitations over Europe and Eastern Asia. Afterward, a quick look about the hurricane season over the Northern Atlantic. And then I will finish by talking about teleconnection impact, about the La Nina event, which could have an impact over Northern Atlantic, or the weather regime over Europe. So a meteorologic phenomena happening in the tropics could have an impact over the mid-latitude regions. So let's start by the introductions. We can see that we have a different weather product. So the weather forecast that we use on a daily basis, and it's short-term forecast. And we can see that we have different weather product afterward for making weather forecast about seasonal or a monthly period. We will use seasonal forecast here. So it's not forecasting daily value, it's rather forecasting daily value average over a month period or a season period. For example, I will make a forecast of seasonal forecast for this winter, meaning an average over a 3-month period. So the skill is a little bit easier to forecast monthly average temperature rather than daily average temperature. So it could increase a little bit the skill, despite the fact that it's far away. We have forecast until month plus 7. So I will not talk about climate projections. It's a different story, but I will stick on the seasonal forecast. So what is seasonal forecast? We'll try to resolve physics equations based on the fluid mechanics and thermodynamic theories. We have some small changes in the initial state, which could lead to a big impact in terms of forecast for a week ahead or a month ahead. It's based on the Lorentz chaos theory. So a little bit the butterfly effect. So in order to catch this uncertainty, we'll use multiple weather forecasts, meaning 51 scenarios for the European models, for example. So with this 31 scenario, we will compute some probabilities forecast in order to catch the uncertainty and the trend compared to climatology. So in the next slide, you can see that we have a time series plot. On the x-axis, we have a box plot of climatology in gray. The red dot line is the observations in winter 2019 toward winter 2020. And I will make a forecast about January 2021 from the seasonal forecast of September 2019. So over Northern Europe, you can see that the median scenario of the seasonal forecast was forecasting 1.2 degrees above seasonal long-term average for January 2020. The observations was close to 4.4 degrees above seasonal long-term average. It is observations. And you can see that the error is quite huge, close to 3 degrees compared to the median forecast. However, if I do probabilistic forecast, we can see that we catch well the trend of this warm, very warm bias in January 2020. So in 75% of the scenario, the temperature were above seasonal long-term average. So we catch pretty well on this warm bias, mild bias for January 2020. And this winter was very exceptional because we have a lot of westerly flow from the Atlantic. And generally, when we have a westerly flow, it's definitely a milder winter. And you can see it was very mild. But keep an eye on it, and we do probabilistic forecast, not determinist forecast with one value. And afterward, we have a map, which is the correlation between seasonal forecast and observations. And we can see that we have a better skill over Eastern Asia, because when we have yellow to red colors, it's a better correlation between seasonal forecast and observations. And at the opposite, when it's gray, we have a low skill, owing to the fact that we have mid-latitude storm tracking toward Europe, and it could give some wide discrepancies between the seasonal forecast and the observations. So that's all for the correlations, the skill and error. I will do the seasonal outlook for Europe for this winter. So for Europe, we can see that we have a very mild bias at the moment, not a very mild bias, but a weak bias toward milder conditions over Europe, especially over northeastern part of Europe and over eastern side of the Atlantic. So in 60 to 70% of the scenario at the moment, at this stage, in the last update of the seasonal forecast, which was released around at the beginning of September, we have a warmer trend for December, January, and February 2022 toward 2023. So the sea surface temperature will have definitely an impact for this winter. At the moment, we have a very warm sea surface temperature over the northern Atlantic. And in case of a westerly flow, definitely it will be milder. However, the snowpack of Siberia could have a big impact too over Europe, especially in the case of a easterly flow. If we have easterly flow and a lot of snow over Siberia, it could have some colder impact over Europe. But at the moment, for September, we don't see any snow. It's not the season. It will begin to snow around October and November. So we'll keep an eye on it in the coming months. Afterward, we can have a look to Eastern Asia, and we see that we have milder conditions for Eastern Asia, and definitely in 70% to 80% of the scenario, we have a milder conditions, especially for central to eastern part of China. South Korea and Western Japan is a little bit less mild, owing to the fact that we know that during a La Nina event, when the sea surface temperature over the tropics in the Pacific is colder than seasonal long-term average, it could have for this winter risk of a colder snap for northeastern part of Asia. At the moment, we do an average over December, January, and February for this winter. So it means it could be cold for 1 or 2 weeks, but the seasonal outlook, the average temperature from this winter could be definitely warmer, despite some brief cold snap, which could be triggered by this La Nina event. Afterward, we can see that over Europe, we don't have a big signal in terms of precipitation outlook, close to seasonal value. And over Eastern Asia, at the opposite, we have a dry bias for southern China, and it could have an impact for the hydrogenations in the vicinity of the upward watershed of the Three Gorges Dam area. Definitely, the La Nina or different teleconnections could have an impact over southern China in terms of precipitations. And you can see that La Nina event is favoring more precipitations above to well above seasonal long-term average over northern Philippines. Owing to the fact that the La Nina event push warm sea surface temperature toward the maritime continent and favoring wetter conditions in the vicinity. So I will do a quick look about hurricanes seasons over Northern Atlantic. And you can see that the climatology, that the average scenario for 30 years is above the current accumulated cyclonic energy, the energy released by a tropical cyclone during its lifetime. But since the beginning of September, the tropical activity has bounced back relatively quite high, owing to some quite tense tropical storm development in the vicinity of America. On Northern Atlantic, and definitely we have even a tropical storm Daniel, which has tracked toward Iberia in the past weeks. But when we look the right map, we can see that the forecast and the sub-seasonal forecast, it's close to the climate mean. So the forecast mean of the ensemble seasonal forecast is close to seasonal value. So we expect at the moment that we should see some risk of a new tropical storm development in the Northern Atlantic for October, but the peak of the season is beyond us. And keep an eye on it. We could see some tropical storm development, but at the moment, we should see less tropical storm development than compared to September. And despite the fact that the sub-seasonal forecast is favoring seasonal tropical storm development in Northern Atlantic, we have very warm sea surface temperature, well above seasonal long-term average over the Northern Atlantic, and this warm sea surface temperature could favor some tropical storm development in the coming weeks. So despite the fact that the seasonal forecast is forecasting a downward trend in the tropical storm development over Northern Atlantic, this warm bias is favoring risk of upward trend, upward risk, upward revisions in tropical storm development for Northern Atlantic. And moreover, we have this La Nina event over the Pacific. It's a teleconnection phenomena, meaning that the cold temperature that we experience compared to seasonal value over the tropics, this blue area means colder temperature over the sea surface temperature, could have an impact as well for Northern Atlantic by decreasing the wind shear in the Northern Atlantic, meaning that when we have a lot of wind shear, it could cut in half the thunderstorm or convections, and we can have less tropical storm development if we have a lot of wind shear, meaning a difference between the wind at the surface and the wind directions above mid-altitude. So definitely, the La Nina event should decrease this wind shear and afterward increase the chance to see a tropical storm development. So despite the fact that we have a seasonal normal outlook for October, we have some teleconnections phenomena which could favor some upward revision in this forecast. So for the end, the main takeaways, it's a mild bias in the last seasonal forecast for this winter over Europe and Eastern Asia. Afterward, we can see that we have a dry bias for Eastern Asia, no big signal for Europe, but drier conditions for China could have an impact over the hydro generations and lead to less hydro power generations. And afterward, we can see that we have quite a normal outlook for October in terms of tropical storm development, but be careful. The hurricane season over the northern Atlantic, the peak of the season is behind us. And last word, in terms of quality of the forecast, we know that the skill is potentially lower than other regions of the world, especially over Eastern Asia. The skill is a little bit better than over Europe. And that's all. If you have any question, do not hesitate to ask.
Thank you, Laurent, for your presentation.
Welcome.
One question for you. So you said that there is a mild bias for the seasonal weather forecast for the coming winter period over Europe and Eastern Asia. But can we have a cold weather period with this warm bias at some point?
Yes, definitely. Despite the fact that for December to February 2023, we have milder conditions in 60 to 70% of the scenario. We have other scenario which despite more seasonal value or even slightly colder temperature for this winter. And moreover, it doesn't mean even if this winter is warmer than seasonal long-term average, we can see some colder temperature for a week or for even a month. For example, if January 2023 is colder than seasonal long-term average, and December and February is warmer, definitely the average for this winter will be above seasonal long-term average, despite the fact that January could be colder. So keep in mind that we have an average. It is over a long period of 3 months. So definitely we can have a week or two of cold conditions, definitely. And over Eastern Asia, definitely the teleconnections of the La Nina event could have, from historical point of view, could increase the risk of colder temperature.
Okay, thank you, Laurent.
You're welcome.
For your presentation. So we'll try to switch to the gas part with Adrien. So we have a lot of technical issues. Adrien, can you hear us? And can we hear you?
Hello, Julien. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
We can hear you. Exceptionally, I will pass the slides. So Adrien, the floor is yours for the gas part.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Julien. So a lot to say in 15 minutes. It's definitely a challenge, but I hope you will have questions and we'll be able to drill down more into the things I will present. So I can say, I think it's fair to say that we are 1 year into the crisis. You can see the first spike in gas prices in early October 21. Since then, with the start of the war in Ukraine, obviously the situation has aggravated with the first post-war spike in gas prices in early March, then a softening, and then since June with the first cuts to Nord Stream 1, we've been rallying once again to eye-watering levels above 300 euros per megawatt hour. Since then, price have softened. but again yesterday with the developments on the likely sabotage of Nord Stream 1 and 2, and with comments from Gazprom on the Ukrainian transit, we are once again in a massive volatility. So we are really deep into the crisis, and we'll see that we are still will likely remain in this crisis for a while. I mean, when we look at prices, it's very important to look at storages as well, because ultimately this is what makes the price, let's say. And as you can see, we started, we were at the end of last winter, very low in storages in a context of falling Russian flows. And yet, Europe managed to refill storages slightly above the historical average. So let's see on the next slide, let's drill down a bit on how this played out. So obviously, this is, I mean, we all know that Russian flows have collapsed, but I think it was still important to show it again to understand the scale of the change for Europe. It's really the end of an era of decades of gas trade between the USSR, then Russia and Europe, and it's really coming to an end now. You can see that versus the historical average, the current Russian flows are more than 300 million cubic meters per day lower than so what they used to be. So it's a huge loss for the European gas system. Now, we only receive gas from Turk Stream 2 towards Southeastern Europe and Ukraine, but as I said, there are big risks around the Ukrainian transit, which is already quite low. Actually, it's running at low rates. If we think in terms of share of Russian pipe gas in the European gas supply, we were at 35% in 2018, 2019, down to 31% last year. And this year in 2022, we expect only 14%, while for next year, we forecast, depending on the assumptions, between 0 and 8% of market share for Russia in Europe. So it's a dramatic move. If we go on the next slide, so we have the good news. It's really that LNG imports into Europe have really helped make up for the bulk of the loss, and this is the main reason why Europe managed to refill as it did. It's not the only one, but it's the main reason. And you can see that since basically the start of the year, we've seen record high European LNG sendouts consistently, and we expect very high sendouts to continue. So contrary to the share of Russian gas, obviously the share of LNG in the European gas mix has surged from 90% in 2021 to 33% this year, and we expect that this will continue around those levels. So now it's interesting to ask how come did Europe manage to get all this LNG? So if we go to the next slide, I've tried to show a bit what changed in the global gas energy market. And so if you look at the chart in the middle, you can see that Europe has imported 46 billion cubic meters more in the January to September period versus last year. That compares with the 55 BCM lost from Russia. But that 46 BCM increase, if you look at the chart on the right, which shows global LNG export over the same period, it's more than twice as much as the global increase in LNG exports. So in fact, for Europe to attract that much LNG, we had not only to grab all the extra supply this year, but as well to divert LNG away from other markets, in particular China, which is down 17 billion cubic meters per day. 17 billion cubic meters in January, September, year on year, due to the lockdowns, but as well absent industrial demand due to high watering prices. And we also basically took the LNG away from South Asia, where spot LNG is unaffordable. They have poor credit, so it's no longer doable for Pakistan, Bangladesh, and some Indian buyers to just bring LNG cargoes. We've also been lucky to see much better hydro in Brazil versus last year. So all in all, thanks to let's say exogenous variables like the COVID and hydro in Brazil, but as well thanks to a fierce price competition, as you can see on the chart on the left, Europe has been able to attract all that LNG. The chart on the left really shows how the JKM, which used to be at a premium over spot LNG price in Europe, well, it's now dozens of dollars per MMBTU at a discount to European prices. So obviously, when you have US supply, you just direct it towards Europe. But this has come thanks to the very high prices. Now, this surge in LNG into Europe has had, let's say, unintended consequences. And if we move to the next slide, I'm trying to highlight this. So it's key to understand that the European flows, the flow pattern in Europe has completely reversed. We used to have flows from Russia flowing east to west. Now we are getting LNG from basically the Atlantic, and the flows have shifted from the west to the east. But the European gas system has not been designed to accommodate such a configuration in flows. So we have started seeing some physical congestions in some key points of the network. And for instance, I'm showing on the left the flows between Belgium and Germany, and Belgium and the Netherlands, which is a key choke point for the European gas system currently. Basically, the LNG that the westernmost hubs are importing, we cannot push it sufficiently towards the Netherlands and Germany. As a result, we have seen since basically the start of the summer to see huge location spreads, so price differences between the TTF and other prices. And you can see on the chart on the right that, for instance, the NBP, the PEC price in France have been trading at huge, massive discounts to the TTF because of those congestions. So actually, this is sending an investment signal for extra cross-border and regas capacity. And if we go on the next slide, we can see that this is actually taking place. There are many new projects for new regasification capacity in Europe in the form of floating regasification and storage units, FSRU. It's all over the news, in particular in Germany, in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, actually, it has just started, the new one in M7. But as well, some in Italy, others in France, in the Baltics. So as you can see, we will see in the next few years a huge ramp up in regasification capacity. So that's good news to solve the congestions in Europe. If LNG can go directly into Germany and the Netherlands, for instance.
I'm sorry for that. We have still some technical issues there. So I think we'll switch to the power part, and we'll go back to Adrien's presentation once it will be available again. So Etienne.
Yes. Hello.
Yeah, I can hear you, Etienne.
Perfect.
So yeah, let's switch to the power part, and we'll finish with the end of the gas presentation.
Okay, great. So hello, everyone. I know my colleagues already gave you a lot of information to digest, even though the gas part was not handed yet. Thus, I'll try to be as clear and concise as possible, but unfortunately, the carbon and power markets were not spared either by the energy crisis. So buckle up for more interesting news. Okay, so as usual, let's start with a quick view on the recent evolution of carbon prices. And as you can see on all three charts, actually with the blue curve, the carbon prices have been particularly volatile over the past weeks, and several reasons are behind these wide moves. So first, the EUA DEC 22, the famous benchmark contract for the carbon market, nearly hit 100 euros per ton at the end of August, but the rise was actually only induced by short-term factors rather than actual structural change. So what do I mean by short-term factors? It's a combination of seasonally halved auction volumes, as you can see with the green bar chart on the left, heat waves across northwestern Europe, a catastrophic French nuclear availability, and I will go deeper into this in the power parts, and a rather weak renewable production, especially on the hydro side, once again induced by the heat waves. But as displayed by the charts, the bullish trend was short-lived, and prices not only reversed, but also managed to drop by nearly 33% in only 3 weeks at the end of the month in early September. But what triggers such fall? In my opinion, we can identify three main drivers behind this sharp move. So first, a rather standard reaction to a sudden surge of gas and power prices, as we had already seen in March 2022. So usually when power prices and gas prices tend to explode, EUAs tend to fall. Second, a strengthening anticipation of demand destruction resulting both from the skyrocketing energy prices and the bleak macroeconomic outlook already presented by my colleague Olivier earlier in the presentation. And finally, and in my opinion, this was the main bearish driver, we saw emerge discussions at the time at the EU level of measures to protect consumers from the high energy prices, which were likely to result in a market intervention with a bearish impact on EU ETS. So basically all measures, among the measures, the most likely one to be implemented implied a higher supply of EUAs to protect consumers from the high energy prices. But before I dig deeper into the market interventions issue, I think it's interesting to notice on the right chart that for the first time since April 2020, the speculators, which are represented in orange, have turned from a net long position to a net short one, which I think highlights pretty well the bearish sentiment currently prevailing in the carbon market. Okay, so let me just, So now that you have all these elements in mind, let's dig into the political turmoil. So it's not news, but it's particularly true nowadays. The policy environment and all the debates on how to use EU ETS to face the crisis are now the main focus of the carbon market. And among the overwhelming waves of news that I'm sure you've all been receiving since August and really likely earlier, there are three main subjects to monitor closely in the upcoming weeks. First, the EU emergency energy plans. And you know all the emergency EU Council meetings that were announced since late August. So the difficulty of this issue is that the measures are still being discussed. Nothing is decided yet, even though we have seen emerge a lot of rumors, and hence the impact on CO2 prices is hard to anticipate. On one side, of course, there were reports of energy demand reduction targets, which would be bearish for emissions. And on the other, the lawmakers are also considering gas price and power revenue caps, even though it's still among, let's say, the center of debates. And those measures could, in the best case, avoid the worst demand destruction scenario. It will not prevent it, of course, but as it will perhaps avoid the worst cases, it's hard to determine the exact pressure on emission prices that would result from all these measures. Oh, and as usual, when the energy market's volatility is soaring, Poland is pushing for a temporary suspension of the carbon market. But once again, the European Commission is strongly opposing such means. So really, we see such measure as very unlikely for now. The second point, and once again, in my opinion, it's the main one, is the famous REPowerEU plan of the Commission. So just a quick sum up in case you forgot, the Commission proposed a few weeks ago numerous measures to finance the EU independence from Russian fossil fuels, including the auction of 20 billion worth of allowances from the MSR over 3 years, which, as you can imagine, triggered a sell-off at the time of the announcement on the carbon market, as it implies an additional volume of e-waste to be supplied. So the measure has provoked heated debates, to say the least, among policymakers since it was disclosed, with the right-leaning MEPs pushing for a higher revenue target and hence number of e-waste sold over a shorter period of time. So really, such kind of amendments will have a stronger bearish impact on prices, while the progressists oppose the use of the MSR as a cash pot and propose instead to raise the 20 billion euros with the standard auctions and the revenue from the Innovation and Modernization Fund. So if you have a look at the chart, you can see that we attempted to model the impacts of the different measures, or more the different types of this measure, on the EU ETS balance, and these are shown with the red curves. So as you can see with the green dashed curves, the carbon prices are presenting a strong negative correlation with the market surplus. So you can anticipate how the EU prices could react from the different versions of the REPowerEU measure. But all in all, as you can see, it will release the tension of the market in the short term and very likely increase it at the end of the decade. But lucky you, we have incredibly fresh news on the matter since it came out only late on Monday. So apparently, a majority in the ENVI committee have agreed on raising the 20 billion euros by front-loading EUAs from the standard auction value of the 26 to 2030 period. So basically, it seems that they are not considering using the MSR anymore, but yeah, we will have to wait until the ENVI's official vote scheduled next Monday for more details on the actual proposal. And finally, a quick word on the Fit for 55 package, which is still going on, and the revision of the EU ETS. But unfortunately, the trilogue negotiations, which were supposed to resume in September, were postponed to October due to the current energy crisis. And this could turn bearish for EUAs because so far we have assumed an implementation of the package in 2024. But if the discussions take longer than expected, it could delay the implementation of the new and stricter cap and hence ease the tension further on the market in the short term. So mainly, if the cap is implemented later than expected, it would allow to have a stronger surplus in the short term. As for the next step to monitor, the next EU Council meeting is scheduled on Friday. And as I said before, the ENVI's vote on the REPowerEU amendments is scheduled on October 3rd. So let's see how it turns out. Which leads us to our outlook. Yeah. So in our best case scenario, we do not expect prices to rise back to 100 euros per ton before several months. Of course, the supply of allowances will continue to decrease due to the continuous reduction of the cap and the MSR yearly withdrawals, at least until 2024, which still provides some support, and that's why we expect a recovery at some point. But the unavoidable recession presented by Olivier coming next year in the upcoming months and the likely energy rationing measures should dampen the industrial demand, while the REPowerEU measures that I just presented you, if implemented, will inject more allowances into markets, hence pressuring further the emissions prices. As for the bearish risks that are still prevailing and could drive CO2 prices further down, we can mention a worsening macroeconomic situation, of course, and a potentially additional demand destruction in the industries. All the market interventions presented in the previous slide, from stronger than expected REPowerEU to a temporary suspension of the market, even though, as I said before, we still see it as unlikely for now. And finally, and I will talk more about it in the next part, some additional pressure could materialize if EDF managed to bring back most of its nuclear reactors from maintenance before winter starts. Of course, it's a very optimistic scenario, but it's still worth mentioning. Regarding the bullish potential, and bad news for the ecologists among us, the main driver I see, and perhaps the only one, would be a full reject of the REPowerEU proposal related to the EU ETS. But even then, the effect could be offset by the additional demand destruction it might induce by strengthening the carbon prices. So that's about it for the European carbon market. Of course, I will answer all the questions you might have at the end of the presentation, but for now, let's move to the power part. And as always, let's first have a look at the European power demand, and I think you'll find the situation quite interesting here as well. So as presented by the two charts, and even though it has been on the lower end of the historic range and even below in September, the power demand has been impressively resilient to the energy crisis so far compared to the gas market. It does not mean that it is not impacted, just that the data are showing less than a 3% reduction, and therefore we cannot attribute reliantly, yes, the decrease to the current situation. But several factors could also explain such difference with the gas market. First, it suggests that most of the gas demand destruction comes from fuel switching in industrial processes. So basically, industries manage to use oil-based products or liquid-based products instead of gas without curbing too much of their productions. Second, there is little to no substitution for the power demand, conversely to the gas use, as I just said. And finally, and this is always hard to check, but rumors say that the power demand usually tends to be more hedged than the gas market, perhaps due to the impossibility to store power. However, be very careful on the interpretation of this information. It does not mean that the power demand is protected from destruction. Far from it, actually. Indeed, once the hedges expired, the alternative products prices surge as well, and or at least rise, and the recession will increase production costs while curbing the demand. It is quite likely that the industrial production will start fading, as actually are suggesting the latest PMI for the Eurozone. Now, regarding the supply, well, you won't be surprised to hear that the French nuclear availability remains one of the main concerns of the market. And here again, unfortunately, I don't have much good news on the topic. So our beloved French utility EDF recently revised downward its 2024 nuclear generation output to target to 340 terawatt hours, which is a significant 50 terawatt hours reduction from historic average, suggesting that the current energy crisis and all the turmoil started with the first COVID emergence, with all the reorganization of the maintenance planning, will have long-lasting effects on the French nuclear availability. Basically, as you can see in red on the upper chart, the country's nuclear availability is still very well below the historical range due to the numerous, among other things, numerous reactors being affected by the corrosion issue EDF is attempting to solve. But nonetheless, pushed by the government, EDF intends at least to bring back as much nuclear units from maintenance as possible to maximize the availability during the coming winter. And they actually updated the REMIT availability for the last quarters of 2022 in order to really maximize the availability during the critical period of January and February. And if the corrosion issue is still strongly curbing the country's capacity, it was recently confirmed that the risks were lower on the 900 megawatt units, which represents the largest group of the fleet. It does not solve the problem, of course, but, well, it allows to avoid the worst case scenario, which is still a good thing given the current context. However, be careful when looking at the availability displayed by the REMIT. We already warned you about this in the previous presentation, but it's still a good reminder. So basically, when you look at the green and blue dashed lines on the chart, if we apply a simple translation to the REMIT to reach the outputs targeted by EDF, so it's not a very optimistic scenario, it's just what EDF announced so far, that gives us the two dotted lines. And as you can see, the actual availability expected is much lower, which means that even with the utility best efforts and efficiency, the situation is still likely to be bad for the coming months, or tight at least. And among other things, it explains why the French power forward prices, which we are going to see in the next slide, have been presenting a massive premium over the past months. Now moving to Germany. You may have heard that the government planned to keep 2 of its 3 remaining nuclear reactors in the reserve. So just a quick reminder that the country initially planned to close its last nuclear reactors at the end of this year. But unfortunately, the project feasibility is definitely arguable, as E.ON, which is a power plant operator, recently stated that it was technically difficult, not to say not possible. So both are still discussing the issue currently, but in any case, it shouldn't have much impact on prices since only the reserve is impacted, and it's quite ambitious to use nuclear reactors as reserve due to its lack of flexibility. Good news, however, because we still need one, is that 9 gigawatts of coal, lignite, and oil power generation capacity will be brought back for this winter. So it's a very bad news for the environment, of course, but still a good one for the market balance. And finally, a few words on Belgium. So you may have seen that the first nuclear reactor was closed last week, as scheduled, and the second one should follow in February 2023. Otherwise, the government is still discussing with ENGIE the feasibility to extend the lifetime of at least 2 of the other reactors that are for now scheduled to close in 2025. Okay, regarding prices now. So, well, I'm sure it's not a surprise for most of you by now, but the power prices volatility once again exploded in August, as you can see on both charts, with the French and German CAL 23 reaching near and above 1,000 euros per megawatt hours at the end of the month, which really is a crazy level, completely decorrelated from the fundamentals. So the surge was, of course, a panic move, seemingly triggered by the sudden soaring gas prices, which you can see in the light gray area, representing the clean gas cost, but it was actually a surge induced by the gas market, but also by government announcing bailout plans for utilities, and finally by market participants attempting to exit the market and hence close positions at any price. So really a temporary and panic move. But seemingly to the carbon market, power prices quickly reversed as the gas market retreated. The German government announced that it would not buy gas at any cost, and first discussion on emergency market intervention emerged. They're still very high, but power prices have been adopting a nervous wait-and-see mode in September, waiting for more details on the EU emergency energy plan. An interesting point, though, is that the current very low liquidity showed by the market, it's actually widening the location spreads in Europe. So you can see with the yellow lines that prices in Belgium, for instance, did not follow the German and French ones in August during the really panic bullish move. But it does not mean that the market is not exposed to the same risk, just that the liquidity of the Belgian market is so poor that it prevented prices from surging. So basically, if there is no one to sell, it's more difficult to panic buy, and hence prices won't go. And finally, let's move to our outlook and the last slide on my part of the presentation. So I think a good summary of the situation was made by the French TSO RTE in their 2022-2023 winter outlook, in which they draw a few conclusions. Of course, it concerns France, but as it is one of the larger markets, I think it still gives a pretty good view on the overall situation. So first, RTE states that there is no risk of blackout for this winter, which, as I'm sure you all agree, is a rather good news. Optimistic one, but still a good news. Nonetheless, the TSO insists that the power consumption will be a determinant factor for the looming winter, as a 1 to 5% reductions in national electricity consumption could significantly reduce the risk of curtailment. Of course, the load reduction in case of extreme weather scenario will have to go up to 15%, but it's really an extreme case. RTE also shares our view on the forward prices for this winter and pointed out that the current level above 1,000 euros and near 1,500 euros for December are not representative of the fundamentals, and fundamentals we expect over that period, of course. Be careful, though, it does not mean that there will be no curtailment at all during the winter. The situations remain tight, and in case of a combination of a cold snap, low renewable production, and let's be honest, a weak nuclear availability, we might resort to post-market mechanisms. But on average, it means that for now, it's unlikely that the spot prices will reach such level displayed by the forward contracts. But unfortunately, the correction on the forward market might take some time. So mainly participants might wait for the last minute to sell back, as nobody wants to find themselves short in such tight situations. So that's why we are still seeing such a large premium on prices for November, for example, even though it's only a month away. So all in all, for the power markets, I would recommend to keep 4 points closely in sight to anticipate as best as possible the coming evolution of prices. First, and this is quite usual, the weather conditions. It's a rather standard factor, but the influence on the power demand and renewable production could have a significant impact on the market balance. As RT said, demand will be key. Second, the French nuclear availability might mean EDF's capacity to bring back as much nuclear reactors as possible for this winter. Third, the gas market, which of course will remain the main driver of power prices as they keep a strong correlation. So every event impacting the gas balance is also very likely to drive the power contracts in the same direction as well. And finally, market interventions decided by the EU, for which let's hope we will have a clearer view on Friday with the EU Council meeting. And that's about it for the power analysis. I think we can now answer a few questions on the market if we still have a few minutes, or perhaps you want to go back to gas, Julien?
Yeah, thank you, Etienne. I think we will take the questions at the end.
Okay. No problem.
Adrien is back.
Hello.
Yeah, Adrien, you are.
I'm so sorry for the issues.
Yeah, no problem. Adrien will go back to where we stopped.
That exactly.
And we'll take all the questions at the end.
So yeah, we were saying that physical congestions in Europe due to the inflow of LNG has triggered investment into new regas capacity. But we were saying that the big challenge is not only to have the capacity there, but also to source the LNG cargoes, to fill the new terminals. And if you look at the chart on the right, actually, you can see that this is going to be a challenge because global LNG exports are forecast to grow only 6% over the next 2 years. So this is not enough to make sure that we will be able to run all the European terminals at maximum capacity. So we need to resort to something else to help offset the loss of Russian flows, and therefore we go to demand. Actually, demand is the other lever on which we can act. The first one, if we go to the next slide, is demand destruction in the industrial sector. So when we say industrial, we mean the industrial consumers that are directly connected to the transportation systems, so high pressure. And you can see on the chart that if you look at the black line, so it's the average across Europe, we are currently seeing a 30% destruction of industrial demand across Europe. So between 2 and 2.5 BCM per month destroyed simply because of high prices. Consumers that were not hedged or that choose to sell back their hedges. All in all, so you have seen an acceleration of the trend over the course of June, July, August, and now the picture is stabilizing, although there are some differences country by country. But the Netherlands, Germany, and in France and Spain are countries where we see massive demand destruction. Spain is a bit different because it's a lot because of CHP, so it's a bit apart. But all in all, we see refiners, the chemical industry, fertilizers, basically shutting down and this is having a huge impact. Yet, so it's key to complement the rise in energy import, but is that enough to rebuild a security buffer in storages? Not necessarily, especially if the weather is cold. So we need to resort to another lever, and this lever is the way we heat ourselves. So if we go to the next slide, in fact, I think it's really the silver bullet for Europe, because this is the only thing which is entirely at the hands of Europeans. In our modeling, we show that lowering thermostat by 1 degree Celsius saves 17 BCM throughout Europe. It's huge. This is 4% of total demand, total gas demand in Europe. Or, and like it better that way, it's 16% of storage capacity. So you can rebuild a huge buffer by the end of the winter if collectively all the Europeans lower their thermostats. So it's key to communicate on the need to adjust heating behaviors. But as well, it's not just about communication, it's also a matter of retail prices. And so it's the chart on the left. It shows residential prices for new contracts across Europe. And you can see that, I mean, something that was really stable across time has now surged since 2022, in particular in the Netherlands, for instance, but in other countries. So this is incentivizing demand destruction in the heating space, but of course it comes at a huge social cost, and this is really the story of the winter. It's really the dilemma faced by European governments, which is retail price control. You have two choices. Either you let retail prices go up, therefore you incentivize savings, you shorten the gas crisis, but you fuel inflation on the short term with potentially disastrous consequences, or you cap retail prices, as was done in France. You tame inflation, but you miss essential savings because you do not give the signal to save to consumers, and therefore you risk keeping wholesale prices higher for longer. So it's a huge dilemma that governments are facing. We are seeing more and more governments taking action to cap prices, and that's something that we need to follow quite closely, because this will have an impact on the behavior of heating demand. What we can see so far across Europe is very mixed signals depending on the countries, but overall we see a 9% demand destruction so far. Obviously, as we enter winter, this number will evolve, and this is something that we need to check quite closely, because it can make a huge difference, and a huge difference on prices. And then we move to the final slide on forward prices. And what we believe is that, and this is also what the forward curve is telling us, is that gas prices will remain very high through at least 2024. But of course, that will depend on will the winter 22-23 be cold or not. If there will be issues on the LNG upstream, and plenty other factors, of course, the weather being the biggest risk. In our balances, we believe that the next winter is manageable. We have some buffer, but the big issue is how we are going to refill next summer. Because next summer, we will have virtually zero Russian flows and a limited upside on LNG. So actually refilling will be even more difficult next summer. This is why saving now is key for the European gas market and for the forward prices. On top of that, you have China, which is a key risk. I said at the beginning that Chinese demand was very low due to their COVID policy, but as well subdued activity, high prices. So it's a key risk. The weather in China will be a key risk as well. Another risk, which is highlighted by the events of this week, is infrastructure safety. What occurred on Nord Stream 1 and 2 is worrying for the rest of the infrastructure, so it's also a risk. And finally, what we can say is that demand destruction is here to stay, hence the high prices. But the more households will adapt good practices in terms of heating behavior, the less industrial pain and economic pain. Finally, I would like to highlight the fact that there has been a lot of interventionism from government, from the European Commission. But the key thing to keep in mind is that changing the market rules is not going to create molecules. So government interventions, while they could be welcome in some instances, it must be done with great care to avoid market distortions, because at the end of the day, you risk actually worsening the crisis in terms of security of supply, etc., if we start sending the wrong signals to the market. Measures that are that would be really welcome, for instance, would be those that boost liquidity, financial liquidity, amid eye-watering margin calls. Incentives for savings, like cashback mechanisms for households that lower their gas consumption, for instance, and also facilitation of the execution of new infrastructure. Those are the most efficient measures. Currently, a gas price cap is being discussed. There are pros and cons, but you do not know exactly to what extent distortions will be introduced with such mechanism. So it's always as well a clear risk. That's it for me. I'm happy to take any questions if we still have some time.
Yeah, we still have a few minutes, Adrien, and there is a lot of questions about natural gas. So let's start with the first one regarding Russian gas flows. Do you think today's price reflect the very likely stop of Ukrainian transit?
Yeah. So indeed, the stop of the Ukrainian transit is very likely, but I think there was some kind of consensus on the fact that we are not going to have that transit for much longer. There has been a big move yesterday on the market, a big mover, 25 euros on the news that Gazprom basically might stop it soon. I think it's a panic move that we usually have on the market in such a volatility. So I'm not too worried. But yeah, I think it's priced in by most players. And most importantly, when I said that next winter looks manageable, it looks manageable even without the Ukrainian transit. But again, the difficulty is for next summer.
Second question. So regarding the remaining gas flows through Turk Stream as well, do you think they are under threat? At least the share that goes to Bulgaria.
Yeah. So Turk Stream basically brings gas to Turkey, almost 16 BCM to Turkey, and then the rest transit via Bulgaria to Southeastern Europe, and in particular to Hungary and Serbia. And given the positions of those two countries with regards to Russia, we do not think that this flow is under a big threat. At least not it's not the same risk than on the Ukrainian transit. I would expect this flow to remain because, I mean, Putin needs some form of support in Europe as well. And That being said, the FSB said last week that they had avoided an attack on TalkStream. So obviously, there is a lot of uncertainty. I do think flow will continue, but again, we are living just crazy times, and it's hard to say. But in being rational, the flow should remain towards Hungary and Serbia in particular.
Okay, thank you, Adrien. So just stay with us. I will just launch the satisfaction survey for those who are still with us, and we'll continue to take questions with you, Adrien. So thanks to fill up the
Sure.
survey. So Adrien, what is your view on China going forward? Do you expect weak LNG demand to continue?
Yeah. So one thing to watch in China is the weather. Even if the prices are high, we have seen Xi Jinping being able to say, okay, we will buy at all costs to ensure security of supply. So this is always a risk. The bulk of the demand in China is industrial demand, and on that part, I think it would stay low as long as spot prices remain super high. So I don't expect a big change here, simply because it's just they are out of the money to burn that gas at spot prices. The real issue, I think, for me is more the weather risk.
Okay, a methodology question. So you showed us demand destruction figures for the industrial sector. Can you just please precise the minus 30% is against which reference?
So this is 30% of the industrial demand from users that are directly connected to the transportation system. So the high pressure pipes. This is not small industry. This is large industry, gas intensive industry. So chemicals, refiners, fertilizers, the glass industry, and this is what we monitor.
And so this is minus 30% compared to historical levels.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so maybe one last question. So do we expect Russian LNG to be part of the next EU sanctions on Russia? And do we see any important supply impact from here?
I mean, further sanctions are going to be complicated by Hungary's position. We see that it's already difficult to reach a consensus on new sanctions. I mean, sanctioning Gazprom or de-swifting Gazprom Bank would be difficult because it would imply a stop in TalkStream flows. I'm not sure this is going to be easy to pass. I think the real risk is for Russia to keep doing what it did earlier this year and simply cut themselves the Ukrainian transit.
Okay, thanks a lot, Adrien.
Sorry, perhaps one thing is LNG, Russian LNG. We might see something here, but in our modeling, Russia is still able to evacuate all of its LNG production from Yamal towards non-European countries. So all in all, it has some impact for the LNG market, but not a massive one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Adrien. So this is the end of the presentation. So there are still remaining questions. We'll try to address them by email after the session. So thanks a lot for your attention. We apologize for all the technical issues we had today. Note that the slides and the replay of the session will be shared by email shortly afterwards. So the next webinar session will take place in December. And so it's time to close the session. Have a good afternoon. see you on the Energican platform.